Lunchtime at the NATO training camp. Rachel Carter steps in carrying her tray only to be blocked by four tall, broad-shouldered recruits sneering, "This spot's for real soldiers." One of them bangs his tray against the table in mock challenge laughter erupting around the mess hall. Rachel stands still, her cold, unwavering gaze freezing a passing training sergeant in his tracks. It's the look of someone who's survived the battlefield. He doesn't intervene, just folds his arms to watch as the air thickens like a warning that something is about to happen. Rachel's boots were still damp from the morning drills, her faded uniform hanging loose on her compact frame. She didn't look like much to the others in the room. Plain, no makeup, long black hair tied back without care. Most of the recruits pegged her as a nobody, maybe a reservist who barely made the cut. They didn't know her file was sealed, marked only with reserve recruit to hide the truth. She'd been one of the best a shadow moving through SEAL Team's 6 missions no one talked about. Discharged quietly, reasons buried under classified stamps, she carried herself like none of it ever happened. Her tray trembled slightly in her hands, not from fear, but from the effort to stay still. A recruit nearby, a woman with sharp eyes and a tight bun, nudged her friend, whispering, "She's gonna crack." Rachel's fingers tightened on the tray's edge, just enough to notice before she set it down with a soft clink. The 4 recruits stood closer, their smirks growing sharper, sensing weakness they thought they could exploit. A cook behind the counter, a heavy-set man with a stained apron, paused mid-scoop, his ladle hovering over a pot of stew. He'd seen recruits clash before, but something about Rachel's stillness made him grip the ladle tighter. His eyes darted to the sergeant, who hadn't moved, just watched with arms crossed. The cook shook his head slightly, muttering to himself about kids who didn't know better. Rachel's gaze flicked to the cook for a moment, catching his worry, but she didn't react. She adjusted her tray, aligning it perfectly with the table's edge, her fingers moving with a precision that felt out of place in the noisy mess hall. The recruits around her didn't notice, too busy laughing, but the cook did. He set the ladle down, his hands resting on the counter, waiting for what came next. "Hey, if this story's hitting you, grab your phone real quick. Give this video drop a comment below and hit subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep sharing stories, like Rachel's stories about people who've been underestimated but keep standing tall. All right, let's get back to what happened next. The tallest of the 4, a guy named Derek with a buzz cut and a jaw like he'd been carved from granite, leaned forward. He was the kind of recruit who wore his confidence like a badge, always loud, always first to throw his weight around. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Lost your way to the kitchen staff." His voice carried, pulling more laughter from the tables nearby. Another recruit, a wiry guy named Kyle with a smirk that never seemed to fade, picked up a plastic cup of water. Without breaking eye contact, he tipped it over, letting the cold liquid splash onto Rachel's boots. "Cool you off a bit," he said, chuckling as the water seeped into her socks, pooling on the floor. The mess hall got louder, a few recruits clapping like it was a show. Rachel crouched down, wiping her boots with a napkin, her movements slow, almost too calm. A group of recruits at a nearby table leaned in, one of them, whispering, "She's just gonna take it." Rachel's napkin was soaked, now useless, but she kept wiping her face, unreadable. Derek crossed his arms, his shadow falling over her like he'd already won. Across the room, a young recruit named Sarah, barely out of basic training, clutched her fork tightly. She was new, still finding her place, her freckled face flushed with secondhand embarrassment. She'd been mocked before for her small size, her rural accent. Watching Rachel, she felt a knot in her stomach, her fingers twitching like she wanted to do something but didn't know what. Sarah's friend nudged her, muttering, "Don't get involved." But Sarah's eyes stayed on Rachel, who was now standing, her napkin crumpled in her fist. Rachel's gaze flicked to Sarah for a split second. Not pleading, not asking for help, just seeing her. Sarah swallowed hard, her fork clattering against her plate. The moment passed, but it left a mark like a promise that this wasn't over. Rachel adjusted her cuffs, the snap of fabric cutting through the noise like a warning shot. Kyle wasn't done. He stepped closer, his sneakers squeaking on the wet floor. He was the type who needed attention, always chasing the next laugh to feel big. "You gonna cry about it? Or you just gonna stand there looking pathetic?" he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. The third recruit, a stocky guy named Marcus with a tattoo crawling up his neck, joined in, tossing his empty tray onto the table next to her. It clattered loud enough to make a few heads turn. "This ain't your place, girl. Stick to the back of the line," he said, his tone dripping with fake pity. The fourth, a quieter one named Travis, didn't say much, but his smug grin said enough. He leaned against a chair, watching like he was waiting for her to break. Rachel set her tray on the nearest table, her movements precise like she was setting up a rifle. A veteran at the far end of the room, a grizzled guy with scars on his knuckles, stopped eating. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He'd seen that kind of calm before, in places where hesitation meant death. A female instructor, lean and sharp-eyed, stood near the drink station, her clipboard tucked under her arm. She'd been watching the whole scene, her lips pressed tight. She knew the type recruits like Derek and Kyle who thought size and noise made them kings. She'd been through it herself years ago, when she was the only woman in her unit. Rachel's calm was familiar, but it stirred something in her, a mix of pride and anger. She tapped her pen against her clipboard, the rhythm quickening as Kyle's taunts grew louder. Rachel's eyes met hers for a brief moment, and the instructor nodded almost imperceptibly like she was passing a torch. Rachel didn't nod back, just shifted her weight, her hands flexing slightly. The instructor's pen stopped, her grip tightening as if she knew what was coming and didn't want to miss it. The mess hall doors swung open, and a group of senior recruits walked in, their laughter dying as they caught the tension in the room. One of them, a lanky guy named Ethan, with a habit of name-dropping his connections, noticed Rachel and smirked. "Oh, look, it's the charity case," he said loudly, drawing eyes from across the room. He sauntered over, his boots scuffing the floor, and flicked a piece of lint off her shoulder like she was something dirty. "You're embarrassing yourself standing here like you belong." Rachel's eyes flicked to his hand, then back to his face. She didn't flinch, didn't step back. "Careful," she said, her voice low, so quiet it was almost swallowed by the room's noise. Ethan laughed, but it was forced, his eyes darting to the others for backup. The veteran at the far table tilted his head, his fork tapping against his plate like he was counting down. Outside the mess hall, a maintenance worker was hosing down the pavement, the spray hissing against the concrete. He glanced through the window, catching sight of Rachel surrounded by the 4 recruits. He'd seen her around, always alone, always quiet, carrying her gear like it weighed nothing. He paused, the hose drooping in his hand, water pooling at his feet. Something about her posture, the way she stood unyielding but not aggressive, made him think of his daughter, who'd been bullied in school until she learned to fight back. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, and turned the hose back on, but his eyes kept flicking to the window. Rachel's hands moved to her tray, setting it down with a deliberate slowness that made the worker's heart beat faster, like he was watching a fuse burn down. Rachel turned to leave her tray still untouched on the table. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just moved toward the door with the same steady pace she always had. But Marcus wasn't letting it go. He slid in front of the exit, his broad frame blocking her path. "Not leaving until you apologize," he said, his voice low like he was daring her to argue. The other 3 closed in, forming a loose circle around her. Derek leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. "You think you belong here? Look at you. You're nothing." The mess hall went quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone knows something's about to go down. Sarah, the young recruit, stood up halfway, her chair scraping the floor, then sat back down, her hands shaking. A few recruits pulled out their phones, their screens glinting as they started recording. Rachel's shoulders stayed square, her hands loose by her sides. Her eyes locked on Derek's, and for a split second his smirk faltered. A janitor, an older man with gray hair and a limp, paused, his sweeping near the door. He'd seen plenty of fights in this camp, but something about Rachel made him stop. Her stance shifted just a fraction, knees bent, weight low like she was bracing for impact. The janitor's grip tightened on his broom, his eyes flicking to the SEAL instructor at the corner table. The instructor, face weathered from years in the field, set his spoon down slow. "This is about to get good," he muttered to the guy next to him. Derek didn't notice. He was too busy playing to the crowd. "Take this act outside," he barked, planting a hand on her shoulder to shove her. Marcus stepped behind her, ready to grab her if she tried to bolt. Kyle and Travis closed in tighter, their grins wide, thinking they had her trapped. Rachel's fingers flexed once, her boots scuffing the floor as she adjusted her balance. In the kitchen, a young dishwasher, barely 18, peered through the serving window, his hands still wet from scrubbing pots. He'd heard the laughter, the taunts, and now he saw Rachel cornered but unshaken. He'd grown up in a rough neighborhood, where standing up meant everything. His fingers gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles pale as he watched Rachel's subtle shift in posture. He didn't know her story, but he knew that look, someone who'd been pushed too far but wasn't about to break. The dishwasher's coworker nudged him, saying, "Keep working, kid," but he couldn't look away, his breath catching as Rachel's hands opened ready. The air felt electric, like the moment before a fight breaks out, in a place where no one backs down. It was over in 40 seconds. Rachel twisted Derek's arm, locking it in a grip that sent him crashing onto a table, dishes flying. Marcus lunged, but she swept his legs, dropping him like a sack of flour. Kyle swung a fist. She caught his wrist twisting until he yelped and fell. Travis barely moved before she pinned his head to the tile with a single fluid motion. She stood in the wreckage, breathing even her face blank. The room was frozen phones, still recording, mouths open. Sarah, the young recruit, was on her feet now, her hands clenched, eyes wide with something like awe. The janitor leaned on his broom, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Rachel stepped over a spilled tray, her boots crunching on a broken plate, and headed for the door. Nobody moved to stop her this time. The commanding officer burst through the door, his boots thudding against the floor. He was a big man, gray hair clipped short, his voice booming as he took in the scene. Tables knocked over trays, scattered 4 recruits groaning on the ground. What the hell is this? You just attacked 4 recruits. He demanded, his eyes locked on Rachel. Derek, clutching his arm, scrambled to his feet. She's crazy, sir. Came at us for no reason, he said, his voice shaking with anger and embarrassment. Marcus was still on the floor, rubbing his knee, muttering curses. Rachel stood there, hands clasped behind her back, not saying a word. The officer's gaze flicked to the phone still raised, then back to her. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. Sarah, still standing, opened her mouth to say something, then closed it, her hands twisting together. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the mess hall's lights. A medic who'd been eating in the corner set down her tray and walked over, her face calm but her eyes sharp. She'd seen injuries before, patched up soldiers in worse shape than these recruits. She knelt beside Marcus, checking his knee, but her attention was on Rachel. The way Rachel stood still, controlled, not a trace of panic, reminded her of a field operative she'd treated years ago, someone who'd walked out of a firefight without a word. The medic's hands moved quickly, but her gaze kept flicking to Rachel like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Rachel didn't acknowledge her, just kept her eyes on the officer. The medic stood brushing her hands on her pants and said quietly to the officer, "They're fine." She didn't break anything. Her tone carried a hint of respect, like she knew more than she was saying. Then the officer's eyes caught something. A faded patch on Rachel's sleeve, a black viper coiled around a star. His jaw tightened, his voice dropping. "SEAL Team 6, Night Viper." The room shifted. Recruits who knew the name snapped to attention, their spines rigid. Others just stared confused, the whispers growing louder. Rachel didn't move, didn't nod. Her eyes held his steady as stone. The officer's tone changed softer now, almost cautious. "Carter, step outside." "Now?" She nodded, once grabbed her tray and walked out, her boots leaving wet prints on the floor. Ethan, the senior recruit, stood frozen, his face pale as the whispers turned to her name. He dropped his tray, the sound echoing in the stunned room. The janitor started sweeping again, his smile wider now, like he'd known all along. The mess hall erupted into chaos the second she was gone. Recruits shouted over each other, some laughing nervously, others piecing together what they'd just seen. The SEAL instructor leaned back, grinning. "Told you it'd get good," he said, picking up his spoon. Derek was rubbing his arm, his face red with humiliation. Kyle was muttering about his wrist, his smirk gone. Marcus and Travis avoided everyone's eyes. The officer was already in the hallway, phone in hand, dialing. Rachel leaned against the wall outside her tray, balanced on one hand. She didn't look shaken. She just waited like she'd been here before. Sarah slipped out of the mess hall, hesitating near the door. She wanted to say something, anything, but Rachel's calm eyes stopped her. Sarah nodded almost to herself and went back inside, her steps a little steadier. In the barracks that night, a recruit named Javier, who'd been quiet during the mess hall scene, sat on his bunk scrolling through his phone. He'd found an old forum post buried deep in a military chat thread about a female SEAL who'd taken down a high-value target in a single night. The post didn't have a name, just a code name, Night Viper. Javier's hands froze on the screen, his thumb hovering over the blurry photo attached. It was her Rachel's stance, the way she held her shoulders. He showed it to his bunkmate, who shook his head, saying, "No way, that's her." But Javier wasn't so sure. He glanced at Rachel's bunk across the room, where she was folding her uniform with the same precision she'd shown in the mess hall. He didn't say anything, just put his phone down and lay back staring at the ceiling. Years ago, Rachel had stood in a dusty hallway, a sealed envelope in her hand. A captain, his face grim, had said, "You're out, Carter. Orders from above." She'd walked away without a word, the desert sun burning her back. She'd known what it meant to be better than the men who hated her for it. Now outside the mess hall, she set her tray down, the memory flickering in the way her fingers brushed her sleeve. The officer stepped out, phone still in hand. "You didn't tell anyone," he said, not a question. Rachel's eyes met his. "Didn't need to," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The officer nodded like he understood more than he let on. He glanced at the patch again, then at her face like he was seeing a ghost. Rachel picked up her tray and walked down the hall, her steps echoing in the quiet. The next day, a training drill went wrong. A live fire exercise meant to test teamwork turned chaotic when Kyle ignored orders trying to show off. Rachel was on his team, moving through the course with her usual precision. When a misfired round sparked a small fire in the dry grass, Kyle panicked, shouting at everyone to fall back. Rachel didn't. She grabbed a nearby extinguisher, doused the flames, and reset the course in under a minute. The other recruits stared, their rifles still raised, as she walked back to her position. Kyle's face burned red, his voice cracking as he muttered, "Didn't need your help." Rachel just wiped her hands on her pants and said, "Next time, listen." The instructor, watching from a distance, jotted something in his notebook, his eyes lingering on her. During a night training session, Rachel was assigned to navigate a pitch-black obstacle course. The recruits were paired up, but her partner, a cocky guy named Ryan, sneered as they started. "Don't slow me down," he said, his flashlight bobbing ahead. Halfway through, he tripped a wire, setting off a deafening alarm. The other recruits laughed, but Rachel moved silently, disarming the trap with a quick twist of her knife. Ryan scrambled to his feet, his face red, muttering about bad luck. Rachel handed him his dropped flashlight, her expression blank. "Stay behind me," she said, her voice so calm it stung. The other recruits fell silent, their flashlights flickering as they followed her lead. Ryan didn't say another word, his bravado gone, his steps careful now. By dinner, the camp was alive with talk. Recruits who'd laughed at Rachel now whispered her name like it was a secret they weren't supposed to know. A few searched online, digging up rumors about a female SEAL who'd vanished years ago, Night Viper 1 said, showing his phone to the group. The grainy photo was blurry, but the stance was unmistakable. Derek overheard and dropped his fork, his hands shaking. He'd thought she was nothing, just another recruit to push around. Now, he couldn't look at her without seeing that patch. Kyle was quieter, his phone buzzing with notifications he didn't check. Marcus tried to laugh it off, but his jokes fell flat, the room ignoring him. Travis just ate in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate like he was afraid to look up. In the officer's office, Rachel stood across from his desk, her hands still behind her back. The room was small, cluttered with files, and a flickering fluorescent light. He didn't sit, just looked at her, the file in his hand unopened. "Why'd you let them push you like that?" he asked, his voice curious, not accusing. Rachel tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "They needed to learn," she said, her words sharp but calm. The officer nodded, flipping open her file. One line stood out, "Discharge classified circumstances." He closed it, his fingers lingering on the edge. "You're not just a reserve recruit, are you?" Rachel didn't answer, just held his gaze. Outside, the camp was settling down. But inside, the air felt charged, like the moment before a decision is made. During a late-night briefing, the officer called Rachel to the front. The room was packed, recruits shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by the dim projector. He handed her a marker and pointed to the board where a tactical map was drawn. "Fix it," he said, his voice neutral. The recruits shifted, some smirking, expecting her to falter. Rachel took the marker, her movement steady, and redrew the plan in seconds, flanking routes, choke points, all perfect. The smirks faded. A senior instructor who'd been quiet until now nodded slowly, his pen tapping his clipboard. "That's how it's done," he said, his voice carrying. Rachel handed the marker back and returned to her seat, ignoring the stares. Ethan, sitting nearby, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence gone. The camp's mood shifted after that. Recruits who'd mocked Rachel started keeping their distance, their eyes dropping when she passed. Sarah, the young recruit, found herself watching Rachel during drills, mimicking her stance, her focus. One day, Sarah dropped her gear during a run, and Rachel stopped picking it up without a word. She handed it back, her eyes meeting Sarah's for a moment. "Keep going," Rachel said, her voice soft but firm. Sarah nodded, her chest swelling with something like pride. She ran faster that day, her steps surer. The other recruits noticed their whispers quieter now, less cruel. Rachel didn't seem to care. She kept her routine, her focus unbroken, her silence louder than their words. One morning during a hand-to-hand combat drill, Rachel was paired with a recruit named Lena, who'd been one of the loudest in the mess hall, laughing when Kyle spilled the water. Lena smirked as they faced off, her stance loose like she thought this would be easy. The instructor blew the whistle and Lena lunged, aiming for Rachel's shoulder. Rachel sidestepped, her movements fluid, and tapped Lena's arm just hard enough to throw her off balance. Lena stumbled, her face flushing as the other recruits watched. "Lucky move," she spat, coming at Rachel again. This time, Rachel caught her wrist, holding it for a moment before letting go. "Focus," Rachel said, her voice even. Lena froze, her bravado crumbling, and stepped back, her hands shaking slightly. The instructor nodded, his eyes on Rachel, not Lena. Derek's dismissal came quietly. The officer called him in at dawn, sliding a paper across the desk. "You're done," he said, his voice flat. Derek's jaw clenched, his voice rising. "Sir, she attacked us." The officer cut him off. "You disrespected a superior. Pack your bags." Derek left his bunk cleared by noon, his name fading from the camp's talk. Kyle's fall was louder. The mess hall video had spread online, his face plastered across comments calling him out. His sponsorship for an elite program was gone by evening, his phone buzzing with messages he couldn't face. Marcus tried to hold on, but the other recruits shut him out, their silence colder than any words. He transferred a week later, his charm useless now. During a supply run to the camp's armory, a clerk noticed Rachel signing for her gear. His hands paused over the clipboard, his eyes catching the name Carter written in her precise handwriting. He'd heard stories of a SEAL who disappeared after a classified oppie. He squinted at her, then at the faded patch on her sleeve. "You're her, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Rachel didn't look up, just handed the clipboard back. "Just need my gear," she said, her tone flat. The clerk nodded, his hands moving faster now, like he didn't want to waste her time. As she walked away, he watched her go, his fingers tapping the counter, a quiet respect settling in his chest. The other recruits in the armory glanced at each other, their usual chatter gone. Travis left a note on Rachel's bunk one night, his handwriting shaky. "I'm sorry," it read nothing more. She folded it, tucked it into her pocket, and kept moving. During a drill, an instructor called her name, his voice sharp. "Carter, lead the squad." The recruits froze, their eyes flicking to her. She stepped forward, of her commands clear, precise, like she'd done it 1,000 times. The squad followed, their movements tighter than before. Ethan in the back missed a step, his face red as he tried to keep up. The instructor watched his clipboard untouched, a faint nod, the only sign he approved. Rachel didn't look for praise. She just led, her voice steady, her eyes forward. One afternoon, Rachel was cleaning her gear outside, the sun, low shadows long. A black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows catching the light. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his civilian clothes, doing nothing to hide his military bearing. The recruits stopped, their conversations fading. He walked straight to Rachel, who looked up, her hands pausing on her gear. They didn't speak, just shared a look that said everything. The air shifted heavier now, like the camp was holding its breath. A recruit whispered, "That's her husband." No one answered. Rachel stood, brushing dirt off her hands, and slung her gear over her shoulder. The man nodded once, and they walked to the SUV together, her steps matching his. The camp wasn't the same after that. Derek's name became a warning whispered in barracks at night. Kyle's face lingered online, a lesson in what not to do. Marcus was forgotten, his transfer erasing him from the camp's memory. Travis stayed quieter now, his eyes always searching for something he couldn't name. Rachel kept moving, her silence a kind of strength that didn't need words. She'd walked through worse than a mess hall fight, carried secrets heavier than any insult. For everyone who's been pushed down, told they don't belong, her story is yours. You're still here. You're still standing. That's enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a